Good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and convene this morning's Health and Human Services Committee sessions. We are, of course, joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Sales, Councilmember Lutke, and we were also joined today by Councilmember Mink. And I want to start today by obviously addressing the elephant in the room, which is what happened earlier this week. I don't know about all of you. We've all been processing this in our own ways. The last 48 hours, I've been binge watching Ted Lasso to help me get through this. But and maybe it's because I've binge watched that show and it's one of my favorites, I'm going to start from an optimistic place. And that is, we've been through heck and back as a community, as a county, as a country over the last 10 years in particular, and have dealt with complex issues that none of us could have ever even possibly imagined were possible. And because of the remarkable dedication, commitment, and love and spirit of the people that we have both working in county government, constituents, nonprofit organizations, I have confidence that we will weather whatever storm lies ahead. And so I appreciate and respect your all's work. It will likely get more complicated, but we will be doing this together, as we always have in the past. So with that in mind, we are receiving an important briefing this morning from our Services to End and Prevent Homelessness to discuss shelter capacity, hypothermia, security services, and motel sheltering. I will turn it over to Ms. Clemens Johnson to tee up this morning's session, and then we will turn it over to our colleagues in Health and Human Services, and I believe there's a presentation that they will be sharing with us. As is always the case, colleagues, we will wait until the completion of the presentation before we ask questions, but if there's something burning, needless to say, please don't feel like you got to hold out the whole time. So with that, Ms. Clemens Johnson, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair and Council members. As the Chair discussed, this is an update really from our budget discussions that happened in April 15th. There was significant funding that was put into CEF for FY25. I think one of the service areas where I believe most of what was recommended by the executive was funded. So there was the replacement of the well, not replacement, excuse me, was the loss of the ERAP dollars, and so that was the end of that program that was supported all throughout COVID. But there was $840,000 added for prevention support, $2.5 million added for the overflow shelter, and support for psychiatric services and peer support with some of the contracts and programs within CEF. So I did want to highlight that, and as you mentioned, we are kind of touching on all of the programs that are priority within CEF when it comes to supporting our residents, especially motel sheltering. That was the biggest investment that was made by the council to the tune of $2.5 million last year, although the FY20 budget is less than the budgets of prior years. So if there are any questions, I can certainly address those. I do want to note that I included information about the point in time count. In April, the point in time count was just getting released by COG, so there wasn't much discussion that we had about the report at that point. So I included a few of the data points that I thought were priority in the narrative report that was part of the bigger COG point in time report, but I think it revealed a lot about the state of homelessness in the county and in our region, and I'm sure that our staff can speak more to that. So if there are any questions, I can address those, and other than that, we can move forward. Thank you.
There we go. Good morning. Thank you so much. Dr. Bridgers, do you want to kick us off? And welcome, Ms. Hong.
Good morning, HHS Chair Albornoz, Council Members Lukey, Sales, and Council Member Mink. Thank you so much for all the work that you do in this space. We've seen an increase across the Department of Health and Human Services nationally and locally with our point in time change and our support that is much needed for our homeless population and those who are indigenous, and even with rent stabilization. Ms. Hung has done a yo-person job in managing this space and the complexities, and as we always say, this is a complex agency with all of the things that we need to do in the community to support those who are at risk, who are underserved, and who are at greatest need. I also commend you, Council Member Albornoz, for your message, your opening message. We are a resilient nation state, and community. We've seen this over time, and the Department of Human Services will be there for our residents. I wanted to say that for all of the listeners out there, to know that the Department of Health and Human Services will continue to provide those much needed services. We did this during COVID, and we haven't changed our direction and way forward. So thank you for the opportunity to bring a few remarks, but I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hung to actually walk through the presentation. Good morning, Council Vice President Stewart, to you as well. Thank you.
Great. And welcome, Council Vice President Stewart.
And I also wanted to express my gratitude to all of you for your steadfast support of the work that we do. You know that it's difficult because you're there with us. You ask the questions, you seek to find out our challenges, and then you come in with support. So I'm so thankful to all of you. And I also want to express appreciation for your optimism, Councilmember Albornoz, because we have to continue serving the people who come to us in need. That is not a choice. We must do it. So our resolve must remain the same, and we have to be strong and be ready to protect our vulnerable populations. So I think that's the message I'm taking away. We need to stand ready for what may come to protect those who are undocumented, the trans population, the homeless population, because we know what may come based on the previous administration. So I think that we will move forward with that spirit. And I also want to thank HHS leadership for their support. Dr. Bridgers, Mark Hodge, they're always ready to problem solve with me. And also especially my SEF team and the partners that work together to make what we do possible. It's really an amazing collaboration that I feel so privileged to lead and be a part of. So I just wanted to start with that.
Thank you, Director Hung.
Okay, so let's go to the first slide. As we have talked about in past sessions, the January 24th, 2024 point in time count indicated an overall increase in homelessness by 28%. Families have been particularly impacted with a 47% increase based on the point in time count this past January. We will be having our next point in time count, just in case you all are planning to join, January 22nd. And I appreciate all the support of that event that all of you have provided in the past as well. So this slide is an indication of our need for ongoing overflow sheltering in motels. This is not, as we know, the best way to provide cost-effective shelter, but it is the way we can expand most quickly. And as you can see by this graphic, the number of families we've served over time has steadily gone up. So this is a chart that shows from 2020 to today at the very far side of the graph that the numbers increase. Now there are seasonal dips, which you see as well, but overall we're trending upwards. These are all the families that we serve in our system at any given time. The straight bar, dark bar going across the bottom is our capacity in family shelter. We can serve 27 families in our 3 family shelters. You can see that the need goes far beyond that, which is why hotels are useful. They're not the best as far as sheltering because they don't have the 24/7 supportive services that are built into our permanent shelters. However, we also don't necessarily want to be investing permanently in family shelter when we can bring that number down. So that is our goal, but this is a reminder that the number continues to grow as far as families we're seeing. The most recent count I heard this week for the total number of families in our system is 140. So 27 of those are in family shelter, the remaining are in our motels. So let me move to the next slide. So what is driving the increased number of families we're seeing? This is the trend that you can see as far as the eviction notices we receive from the Sheriff's Office. And I want to acknowledge the Sheriff's Office for their close collaboration with SEF. They have been providing this information readily, and they have been working more closely with us in recent months on the refugee situation that we've been working on at the Enclave. We appreciate that so much, and our goal is for that collaboration to increase over time. in this chart, though, that you can see that if you look at the numbers for FY22, FY23, and 24, you can see that though the number of late rent notices decreased this year from 44,000, in previous fiscal years, from 44,000 in FY23 to 39,000 in FY24, you can see that the number of eviction writs, which is when a judge says an eviction may proceed, those have increased steadily from FY22 to FY24. In FY22, there were 2,700. In FY23, there were 7,100. That is a huge increase between one fiscal year. And then in FY24, it increased again to 8,200. In addition, the number of evictions executed increased between those 3 fiscal years significantly. And we believe this is what is driving the increase, of course, it's just intuitive, in the number of families we're seeing presenting as homeless and in need of shelter. Let's go to the next slide. This will also show the number of evictions scheduled just this fiscal year, trending upwards. So you can see between August, September, and October, the numbers are significantly higher than in previous months. And we saw almost a doubling between July and August, and then the increase, there was an increase still. The number dipped a little bit in October, but I can tell you we're not seeing a dramatic change in demand in our housing stabilization offices. So let me show you that next, in the next slide. So this is an indication of the demand for housing stabilization services. It's in that office where our eviction prevention services are. And our teams there, you can see by this chart, in the beginning of the fiscal year and the end of last fiscal year, there was not a significant number of people on our wait list. We like to triage people quickly. We like to assign them to our workers and assist in whatever way we can. But this year, we've seen a steady increase in demand, as indicated by this wait list. So we are seeing so many people that they can't automatically be assigned. And so you can see the dramatic rise in the number of people on our wait list. October 17th, you see a peak there of 192. We don't operate that way usually. We want to assign people so that they can get the help they need. But that's where you can see that there was a very large peak. Now I'm thankful it's coming down, and the number of evictions, the number of writs and evictions scheduled dropped a little bit in October, and that may account for the small drop, but we still have a significant wait list. So that is an indication of the demand we're seeing in our offices. We can go to the next slide. One of the questions that was asked was about expenditures. But before I go to expenditures, I just want to reiterate about our eviction prevention services, that the demand has increased. Our budget, however, this fiscal year significantly decreased. And we all know that our COVID era resources were largely spent last fiscal year. So this fiscal year, for our eviction prevention budget, we have $4.7 million. We have been spending at a rate of about $500,000 per month on eviction prevention, and we know that those funds will be gone by this spring. So March, April, we will not have any more eviction prevention dollars. So that's something I wanted to highlight, because you can see the demand is there and is increasing, as are the number of evictions, which leads to the increase in number of households experiencing homelessness, particularly families. And that is indicated by all the graphics that I showed you. So an area in which we don't like spending large amounts is on sheltering. We know that to permanently address homelessness, we need to invest in prevention, and we need to invest in permanent housing. So these numbers are sobering, but I'm going to go over them because it's important that we're familiar with them, given how much we've been spending on motel sheltering. So here is a listing of our actual expenditures in the first 3 lines for the last 3 fiscal years, including our current fiscal year. You can see that we actually spent most of our motel budget on COVID isolation. Makes sense. We were trying to protect those in our congregate shelter by isolating them in our motels. So in FY23, we spent $1.2 million on regular sheltering for families, and then we spent $3.5 million on COVID isolation. And that includes expenditures like food, because when you're isolating, you can't go out and get food, security, and cleaning services after the isolation was done. So in FY23, we spent a total of $4.77 million. In FY24, we continued to weather the outbreaks that we were seeing in the shelters. And you can see not only did our shelter expenses go up, but so did our COVID isolation expenses. They increased as well. So our total expenditure was $5.7 million last fiscal year, which exceeded our budget. What has changed in FY25, because that was pretty sobering to see that we spent $1 million over what was budgeted, and I appreciate all of the guidance that has been provided by our budget team at HHS as well as OMB. We know that we needed to decrease this. So between last fiscal year and this fiscal year, we decided with the recommendation of CDC and public health that we could move from using hotels for isolation to creating spaces in our congregate shelters to isolate. And I want to thank our Healthcare for the Homeless team for leading that effort. It was really daunting, I have to say. Many people, both clients and staff, were worried about the impact of moving isolation to the shelters, but we did it. I will show, I'm sorry, I think the data is in your packet, that once we made that transition, which was at the change of the fiscal year, we saw that the number of outbreaks did not increase, and they weren't longer than average. They lasted about 2 weeks, which is typical, and there wasn't a huge amount of spread within the congregate space. So we did it together. Wasn't easy. A lot of people didn't like it. But we made our way through it, and the CDC recommendations supported that. So that has helped us to decrease our expenditures dramatically. And you can see that for FY25, after about a quarter, we've spent $773,000. That is almost entirely on sheltering families. So with that, we've been able to stay within our budget. We spent a very small amount. I think there was one more room that needed to be cleaned that fell in this fiscal year, so I noted that just for accuracy. But currently, it looks like we're going to remain within our $3.3 million motel budget. However, you can see what I listed as a projected expenditure is higher, $3.9 million. Let's go to the next slide so I can explain that further. So there's a trend that we see. This is a graphic that shows our motel expenditures across any given fiscal year. And in this case, we list 2 fiscal years. Our expenditures increase during the 5 coldest months of the year. Not surprising. We see more families in need of overflow moteling. And so even though we're spending within budget after the first quarter, we expect our expenditures are going to increase, because we still have the commitment to ensure that no family with minor children will be sleeping outside. So to stay true to that commitment, we likely will be overspending. I know Mark's back there cringing a little bit, but thank you. But that is the reality, and I know that no one here would want any families to be sleeping outside when we identify them. So that's just the reality of where we were, but I wanted you to know that. Let's go to the next slide. This is also an indication of the increase in people we see during the 5 coldest months of the year. It's very similar. This includes not just motels, but all of our shelters. So generally speaking, we see an increase in households entering our shelters during from November through March, and that's a well-known pattern. I just wanted to show that here. This is an indication of the shelter entries pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic. The post-pandemic period is just since last May, so it's understandable that it is significantly less than the other 2 periods. The other thing that you'll note, and I'll just explain this because it may be a question, is that pre-pandemic numbers are generally higher. That period is not longer than the pandemic period. However, the numbers are significantly higher. And I attribute this to the fact that prior to the pandemic, we were able to move people out of shelter more quickly. During the pandemic is where we saw a great slowdown and a very large increase in the length of stay in our shelters, including motels. What that means is we're at capacity nearly all the time, so we're not able to serve as many people. So I believe that is the explanation for the difference between what you're seeing with the pre-pandemic and pandemic numbers. And then we will see how the post-pandemic numbers bear out over the coming months. Let's go to the next slide. So I've just talked a great deal about our motel expenditures, which is really not where we want to be investing most of our funds. It is the largest budget item as far as all of CEF's general fund budget items. Sheltering, moteling is the largest budget item. That's not where I want us to be. I want us to be able to move towards investing more in prevention and housing, as I said. One of the solutions that we have seen that can be effective is instead of using motels to also use some sort of short-term intervention. So during the pandemic, because we received such a large investment from the federal and state government with COVID-era funds, we were able to pilot a program called SHARP. I've talked about this in previous work sessions. It's a short-term housing and resolution program. It's 12 months of rental assistance and light touch case management, navigation really. It's not full case management. And that navigation is provided through grant funds. So it's not funded through the county. So it was a program that we were able to start up quickly. It's available to anyone who enters the system very quickly. We don't assess, we just say this is a program that's available to you. And we were able to house, since we started the program, I believe it was about 2.5 years ago, more than 600 households. And the retention rate for this, which is listed here, is 97% for families. That is the population that we're seeing the increase in. So I would love to see an increase or an ability to expand SHARP. Now, overall, the retention rate has been 79%. So for adult-only households, individuals, it tends to be a more vulnerable population, and so it's not always the most effective for individuals, but I have to say 79% is not that bad when we're talking about half the cost of what we spend per year on motels. So regardless, it is, I think, the better solution than using motels. Motels will probably be needed as a form of crisis response, but we do not need to be spending millions of dollars on motels, and we don't want to be. I can also say that SHARP is not funded now. We don't have the money for it. We have a few more households that are in SHARP because they were placed in SHARP last year. So we are staying true to our commitment to paying out the 12 months, and we expect that they will do well. But we don't have funding to refer or house any more people in SHARP. So this is something I wanted to point out because it is a potential solution to our expenditures in sheltering. And I want to say that also placing a family in housing is where we want to be. We don't want to be putting families for extended periods of time in a motel. Some people see it as like the silver bullet. Oh, once they're in a hotel, they're safe, which is true. There's safety there, but they don't have supportive services. Their kids are likely going to have to move to a different school district. It's so inconvenient. There is no kitchen in the hotel. I'm just saying we do it, but it's really just meant to be a temporary measure during a crisis for a short period of time until they can get into housing. Permanent housing is always the solution for homelessness. It is really the only solution. So I just wanted to underscore that here as we talk about alternatives to using motels. In the next slide, there were questions about the rental assistance program. I'm not going to delve into this deeply, but this is also an important program. It's often confused with the emergency rental assistance program. It's a bit different. It's a shallow subsidy program. Currently, those who are eligible are those who are 55, sometimes I get mixed up with other programs, 55 years or older, or those who have a documented disability are eligible for this ongoing shallow subsidy. So that's up to $503 a month. For individuals who are on a fixed income, this can mean the difference between remaining stable in their housing and facing homelessness. So it's an important program. We have this year $4.1 million dedicated to that program. We've already received enough applications and distributed enough RAP for that program to have to close. So it's closed now, which our partners have been saying, and we know this, that there are many more people who need RAP. So I wanted to highlight that here because that's also an important preventive measure. And in addition to preventing people from facing homelessness, when folks are at the end of the subsidy they receive for rapid rehousing or SHARP, they may be in a place where they can take on rent burden, but they may need a little bit of a subsidy to help them remain stable. So it's flexible in that way as well, that we can use it to help families who are graduating from another program to remain housing stable. Would love to see, would love to be able to help more households with this program. In this graphic, you can see that we're showing the number of people we've assisted over the last 3 fiscal years. You can see a small increase in the number served in FY24. That was again, because we had all this flexible COVID funding that we could kick in and increase the budget to the RAP program last fiscal year, but then you can see it came back down this fiscal year, and we are at capacity in that program, so we cannot take applications anymore. So just wanted to share that as another program that is really valuable to preventing folks from experiencing homelessness. And with that's the end of my presentation with regard to housing, but I know there are questions about the security services that are available in our shelters, so wanted to provide an update on that. So with the support of all of you, we were able to provide a supplemental appropriation for our shelter programs last fiscal year, which continued on in the base budget, and that allowed each of our emergency shelter providers for single adults to increase the amount of security they have at each of their locations. This has been impactful. Overall, we're seeing that the incidents that are happening, which continue to happen, are managed better. I'm hoping that you're hearing fewer concerns. I'm hearing fewer concerns, certainly much fewer concerns around the Neville Street shelter, where we also increased the amount of security patrolling the shelter. So that was a really effective use of funding, and I want to thank all of you and our county executive for supporting that increase in funding. I know it was also a significant increase, but I wanted to share that. The one exception is Progress Place. Progress Place continues to be a challenge. I know council members, council vice presidents, you're well aware of the many incidents that occur there. And I can share that the Montgomery County Police indicated that there have been over 100 calls for service just to Progress Place in the last month. I'm saying this because it's important to note the intensity of incidents that happen there and safety issues. It's exhausting for the staff there. It's exhausting to spend our time focusing on safety when we really want to be focusing on services and getting people housed. But I am thankful to security services for bringing in county security. Last year, there are many issues with the contract security there, many concerns, serious concerns. So that security services and the county executive's office has been supporting staffing up Progress Place with county employed security officers, which again, I can't express my appreciation more. So currently we have a post filled for the first 2 shifts. That's 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 11 a.m. The remaining shifts are being covered by voluntary overtime coverage as Director White continues to recruit for permanent security officers at Progress Place, county employed security officers, which generally have performed better than the contract security there at Progress Place. So that continues to be a work in progress, but good progress is made. Last year, there was only, and the years prior, there was only 1 shift covered by county employed security. So there is progress being made. In addition to that, one of the problems that you all have heard about is that when there is a serious incident, and I think you have heard about the sexual assault that occurred at Progress Place over the summer, when there's a serious incident, HHS can restrict an individual from programming. However, if that person comes back, there isn't a way for police to enforce that because it's a contract remedy to a safety issue. There is the ability to use what are called disruptive behavior orders in county facilities to restrict someone, and the police can enforce if someone violates a disruptive behavior order. The fact that we could not restrict based on that sexual assault when that happened, we had a series of meetings with both the police and the Security Services Division, as well as the Office of the County Attorney, because this involves county code. And what we were able to find as a solution is a partnership between the service providers and security services and our police, that when there's a safety incident that occurs, the security, county employed security or police, if it's at an hour when they're not there, can issue a disruptive behavior order on the spot. However, they have been really, really deferential to our partners and to CEF and saying, we don't want to be enforcement heavy. We cannot end homelessness using enforcement, so we want you to take the lead, which I'm so thankful for that partnership. So then they've asked that the service providers make the decision when a disruptive behavior order needs to be issued. And once they make the decision, then they would issue it because they're county employees and have the ability to do so. So that is the partnership and the solution we've identified. What we need to do from here is that we need to come up with an agreed upon set of criteria for different behaviors and what level of restriction that would constitute, because you can issue a disruptive behavior for up to 90 days, and it can be flexible. It could be a day, 2 days, 1 week. And our challenge is always to balance the safety with the need for life-sustaining services, right? We're talking about food and shelter. And so we have to make those decisions very carefully, and having an agreed upon set of criteria would allow us to do that in a consistent manner. So that is the next step that our team is taking with our partners. And from there, we can begin using disruptive behavior orders to have a way of enforcing restrictions there at Progress Place. Those are the security updates, and let's see. Next, we can go to just overall the recommended actions, which I've already touched on a number of times. It's nothing complicated, just to continue to invest more in eviction prevention, RAP also as a means of preventing homelessness, and then to invest in permanent solutions to homelessness, including SHARP, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and our move-up vouchers. Haven't talked about our move-up vouchers. Maybe I'll take a few minutes to discuss that. So in the Housing Initiative Fund that comes through the recordation tax in partnership with DHCA, we have a very small budget line for a move-up incentive or move-up initiative. And what that is it's about $300,000 that are used to go to HOC to provide CEF with a few vouchers, HOC vouchers, so that when folks graduate from a program like rapid rehousing and they're ready to take on rent, But if their income is not sufficient to pay the rent in Montgomery County, then the voucher would cover, help them to, cover rent, and they would pay 30% of their income. That is a very effective means of moving people out of our system and into the ongoing subsidy that they'll need, because we serve many low-income households, and we would love to see an increase in that as well. I know I've asked for an increase in many things, but I'm just going to throw that in there because that's a really important way to keep a flow in our system. We have inflow, we have outflow, but the more we can free up spaces of our higher costing resources like permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, then we can utilize those resources more efficiently. So that is a really important solution. We do have some funding. We'd love to see more funding in there. So I wanted to mention that as well. With that, yes. I can talk a little bit more about hypothermia shelter as well. Just this year, because it is so warm, ordinarily by November 1, we'd be completely full, but we're not now. So that's a change this year. As soon as the temperatures drop, we expect to see many more people in hypothermia shelter. We have well over 100 spaces between our shelters to accommodate the need that we're going to see. As a result of the supplemental increases you provided last year and ongoing, our hypothermia capacity is significantly increased this year. So we are hoping that we'll be able to manage the need this year for a hypothermia shelter, but that is with the support of all of you and the county executive, Dr. Bridgers. So just wanted to point out, I think we're in a better position this year than we were last year as a result of that supplemental appropriation.
Great. That was a lot. So thank you very much for your leadership, dedication, commitment, and especially your team. So I have a few questions that I will start with and then turn to my colleagues on the committee and then by extension colleagues who are visiting us this morning. So I really want to thank you for the disruptive behavior order solution, because I think many of us got SOS calls this summer over that very troubling incident. And so, and I happen to, because of my old job, know a lot about disruptive behavior orders and how complicated that process can be. So I'm very happy to hear you all have been open to and collaborative with the on-site folks, because that was part of the challenge was, there may not have been an HHS staff person or somebody from county government there who could be there to issue the order in real time. But it sounds like that issue's been, for the moment anyways, resolved. But I'll just note this: if there are any requirements to the county code in any way with regards to disruptive behavior orders to better reflect the reality that's on the ground, do not hesitate to let us know, because we can move pretty quickly to make adjustments as necessary. So thank you for that. The numbers obviously are troubling, and we know, sadly, based on, as you mentioned, the previous term of the previous administration, those numbers likely will go up, and that there could be a number of federal grants in jeopardy that we're obviously going to have to keep a close eye on. But could you talk a little bit about the profile of the families that we're seeing? So, because when we say the term family, obviously that can be on a lot of different things, but are there some commonalities? Is there some trend? Is there some thing that is, unifying? And clearly you can draw a straight line between people's evictions and then being out in the street, but talk a little bit more about that context and the profile of some of the families we're seeing.
Sure, I'll get us started, but I would love for my colleague Denise Anderson to join me just in case I miss something.
Sure.
She works very closely with the families we serve. So certainly what I can say is that the experiences of each family are different, but I can tell you some patterns that we're seeing. We're seeing an increase in the size of the family household. So the size increased between FY23 and FY24 from three as the average household size to 4. And what I believe has happened, of course, and it's not a stretch to understand, is that inflation, the ability to afford not just housing, but all the other expenses for a family, a larger family, is harder when the increase in income hasn't kept up with inflation. And then, of course, just housing in Montgomery County not being affordable and rents rising has made it difficult. We also see a significant number of families who've been fleeing domestic violence entering our system. That's a pattern that continues to be something we see. And so definitely lower income families are struggling more, but I'm going to pass it to Denise to add more of what she's observed firsthand. She directs the case management team who provides the supportive services to all the families at the hotels. And a lot more, but that was just a small connection to the question.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Pull up a little bit. So I just want to second what Christine has shared. We have seen an increase in the average size of families. For instance, right now we have about 5 families who are 6 members or more who are using 2 hotel rooms because we just need that level of space to accommodate them. The trends that we are seeing, I think a lot has to do with what was already shared. The increase in the number of evictions, the increase in the number of households that are being sent forward for eviction because they cannot afford the rents. Rents are going up. The drawback or the ending of federal funding from the COVID era, we no longer have those funds to interrupt and stop the evictions. We've had to limit how much we can provide because of the reduced funds. So those households that may have been able to maintain with our support on the prevention side for the last several years are now hitting that wall where they cannot go further. They haven't been able to get back income that will support their households. We can't help them to stop the evictions, and they are facing homelessness. So I would say that's probably the biggest uptick that we've seen. We've had more families that are unable to stop that eviction. They're losing income, or we have families that are working really hard, 2 and 3 jobs, and still not able to afford to maintain their housing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know in the packet, we didn't touch on this in the presentation, but you were also, and this is consistent with a trend we've been seeing for several years now, but that our aging population is now more represented in our unhoused population. Could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of trends there?
Yes, that is a trend that's also troubling. So more than half of the population are 40 years or older, and that trend gradually has been increasing, and this is something you've noted previously, which I appreciate. So that is one of the reasons why the supportive housing programs continue to be important, as well as the rental assistance program, because as people are entering even before they enter, we know, and our housing stabilization team will often comment, we wish we could help more our seniors, and that's why the rental assistance program, because it's before they've even entered the system, where we want to come in with a subsidy. If we know that they're struggling with rent and they're on a fixed income, then we would love to help more people. But we're, as I said, we aren't able to take applications in that program anymore because we're already at capacity. But we have to continue to tailor our supports to that population. So one of the things that has been identified as a need over time is when older adults enter the shelter system, some of them need assistance with activities of daily living. And shelter staff, though they are amazing and that juggle so many different things in the course of a day, they're not trained to assist with their ADLs. So we have been seeking support through health aides to come into shelters, and also in our permanent supportive housing programs to assist with ADLs when needed, because the population continues to need that. In addition, we have now a medical respite program, which is a stone's throw. Like you could literally walk across the street and you'd be there. And that helps to so the staffing of our medical respite programs are CNAs, and there's a nurse there who's on call, as well as many of you know Dr. Catherine Kelly, who is with Kelly Collaborative, and she advises her nurses and CNAs there. That program is so valuable because it can temporarily support people who have higher medical needs, and the hospitals rely on those beds to discharge folks who are no longer, meeting criteria for a hospital admission, but still need medical support. So those are a few of the things we have in place now, but because the number of older adults is increasing, we just need more of it. And also our partnership with Aging and Disability continues to be important. And Dr. Patrice McGee is very committed. I do think if she can, she's going to bring up the need for more health aides again this budget cycle, but really appreciate that partnership as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Last question for now from me is, I know although would always love to be able to do more to give you the resources you need. We were able to increase in some areas and add some FTEs. How are we doing on staffing, and have those positions been filled?
Those positions have been filled. I want to thank Rebecca Sosa, who's here today. She did such an amazing job in the recruitment process, and filled those before the end of the fiscal year, those 8 positions for the housing stabilization team. What I want to point out, though, is that actually it was I'm sorry to say this, because we appreciate them. It was a net decrease of 20 positions. Those were funded, of course, with COVID funds, and the county executive and all of you supported us maintaining 8 permanent positions because they were all term positions. And so they are a help, and they are needed. Have we been able to do longer term case management like we had hoped and strategized? No, because what we're doing is we're just trying to keep up with the demand. Yeah. So those wait lists I showed you, that's an indication of where we are. Everyone is maxed out on their case management, and there are people coming to us that we are triaging. So our approach is to triage. Let's assign those to workers who are sadly closer to eviction, because they are eligible for our service once they receive a court summons for late rent, which our goal was to be as proactive as we can, and that is still a goal. But right now, where we're seeing such an increase in demand, we're not doing that. We're focusing on what's coming to us so that we can meet the need we're seeing as best as possible.
Thank you. We're going to go to Councilmember Sales, followed by Councilmember Lutke, and then Councilmember Mink, and then Council Vice President Stewart.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Bridgers and Chief Hong, for providing today's important updates. I appreciate the challenging work that you all are doing in this space to help our most vulnerable residents. And especially with winter approaching, I know that your workload is going to become even more complex and challenging. Our office has seen a rise in outreach from constituents facing urgent housing needs, truly emphasizing the importance of the work that you are undertaking and highlighting your department's vital role in addressing our community's pressing housing needs. You mentioned the motel sheltering costs account for $34,164 per year. That's approximately $2,847 per month, which exceeds the average rent for a 1-bedroom in Montgomery County. So I appreciate the suggestion for better fund usage, but given our budget constraints, should we closely examine other SEF expenditures to find potential savings? And are you conducting an internal, analysis of your budget to provide any additional recommendations? I love the idea of the SHARP program, and I know that working with HOC to acquire more units would be ideal, and it sounds more cost effective. And so if we were to reallocate some of these funds to the SHARP program, how much do you expect needs to be reserved for motel overflow utilization? So it's a two-part question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I apologize, I'm
Sorry.
recovering from a cough.
Yes.
Got the cough drops in the water.
No, get some water.
So we have been looking at our budget closely. One of the challenges, I mean, first let me say, because our shelter budget line is our largest budget, that's where we looked first, and that's where we could see there's potential savings in moving isolation to shelters, because that significantly decreases our expenditures by millions. And it makes it's more efficient also because people have
No, take your time, get some water.
case management at the shelter. So it's far better on multiple fronts. So that's the first place where we look for savings. The hotels were also used to shelter vulnerable individuals, like individuals who struggled to live in congregate shelter during the pandemic. And so we've also, to save funds there, moved nearly all the singles that were placed there during the pandemic to either housing or shelters. So both combined, that has resulted in nearly $2 million in savings if you look at the projected expenditure for FY25 and the expenditure in FY24. That's where we focused our attention, but I can tell you the CEF leadership team that includes Diana Pina, the Deputy Chief of CEF, that we've been looking very closely at our spending to see if there are areas where we can save. It's difficult because it's all essential. It's either preventing households from entering homelessness, providing the crisis response, or housing them. So it's really difficult to find places where we could trim. Hotels are where it is. Ideally, if we were able to house more people using a lower cost intervention like SHARP, perhaps we could also look at decreasing our other shelter expenses. Perhaps we wouldn't need to rely so much on expanding our individual shelters' capacity during hypothermia season, because that's costly too. The supplemental that we very much needed was millions of dollars as well. Mm-hmm. So what we're looking to do is to find ways to not spend as much on temporary solutions like shelter. That would be my response. We have looked, and the other challenge we're facing is because there was a significant expansion in services during the pandemic, not just emergency rental assistance, but also rapid rehousing. We're now trying to find the funding, like looking where we can move that funding elsewhere, because we have people in rapid rehousing that were placed during the pandemic, and we need to continue paying their rental assistance for 12 to 24 months. It's actually the same with SHARP, because it's 12 months, even though we can't take new people. We have people who are housed now through SHARP who are still in the midst of their 12 months. Okay. So we have not been able to identify significant savings beyond our hotel expenditures, which is where we spend the most money anyway. So I think it has been a fruitful effort, and we hope to continue decreasing our expenditures there and on emergency shelter overall.
Okay, thank you for that. I understand you secured some funding for the efforts through the enclave. I know that there were some significant concerns about evictions. Can you provide any updates regarding those residents?
Yes. So where to begin on that? And I want to first acknowledge Councilmember Mink and you as well, Councilmember Sales, for your involvement in that situation. It is very troubling because we're talking about nearly 200 people, many of whom are children, who were placed at the enclave by resettlement agencies. They're Afghan and Syrian refugees, restarting their lives here after being of service to the U.S. government, and learned that a large number of them were facing eviction about 2 months ago. I think we had heard that there were some families who were struggling prior to that, but I don't think we realized the large number at one location until about 2 months ago. So there's been a large collaborative effort that has happened between Montgomery County, that includes CEF, our community partners, the Muslim Community Foundation. There's a new group called SAFE that is specifically looking to prevent evictions, that's saving families from evictions. They're very focused in on the enclave now because they know what's at stake, and both SAFE and the Muslim Community Foundation have come in with culturally appropriate supports because there are some cultural barriers for the Afghan and Syrian families, changes, in seeking employment. They're just different cultural experiences and assumptions between Afghanistan and here. So that has been vitally important, having culturally competent services come in to assist what CEF is doing. And then the other partners are with the state, the resettlement agencies who had been working with the families. Some of the families had been deemed as self-sufficient, and so the resettlement agency stopped providing services, and then so many of the families struggled to pay their rent because it is higher than their income. A number of the families are disabled, it's higher than their income allows, and a number of the families have disabilities. So many factors that are going against the families and have prevented them from reaching housing stability and self-sufficiency. And of course, self-sufficiency, it's on a continuum. You gradually get there, and we know at CEF that the supportive services we provide have to be centered on the individual, where they are, and to provide the supportive services ideally until that household is ready to take on the expenses that they have. But self-sufficiency is not typically a word we use extensively in our work in homeless services. So, but I know that it is a very important criteria that the resettlement agencies have to abide by because of the federal funding they receive. So we've had a very good collaboration in trying to find a solution for the families at the Enclave. We've tried to work with the Enclave management, and we were hoping that they would provide significant reductions in the amount of arrearages that the families collectively have, and potentially reduce their rent. We had a disappointing update recently that they essentially were not really willing to provide reductions, and that was an update I just shared. So we're revisiting our plan. Our hope still is that no family would lose housing, but what we will likely have to do is relocate many of the families, sadly. Very disappointing because even though it means that they wouldn't lose housing, it's still extremely disruptive. And there's been a community formed there where they rely upon each other for childcare, to drive each other to medical appointments, to pray together. So we're talking about now disrupting something that has been immensely supportive for them in their journey here in the United States. And so we're all very troubled by that, and we will just continue to forge ahead on this plan because CEF's role in this is to prevent them from becoming homelessness. So that may mean, and it looks like it will mean, relocations for many of the families. I'm sorry to share that today because we were very much hoping that that would not be the case, but that appears to be what we have to do.
No, I was also hoping for more promising updates. And given the impacts to staff, what is the current caseload for housing stabilization services? How are staff managing the different caseloads given, the newcomers, and how are you spreading this work across the now much smaller team?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's been really challenging. I have to say the staff report feeling spread thin on a regular basis, and Ms. Sosa and I have talked repeatedly about how we can try to ease the burden for them. There are some days that they couldn't even take lunch because they're working nonstop with customers coming to the 3 regional offices. So it's really been challenging, as indicated by the wait list, which we really don't like having a wait list. That's not how we want to operate. But as far as caseloads go, so it's a rolling caseload. The expectation is that each worker would work with 3 households each day, which when things are going smoothly, when everyone is working, when we don't have people on leave, when all of our vacancies are filled, it can work smoothly. However, in Silver Spring, for example, we have a number of vacancies, and that has proved to be challenging for them to keep up with the demand there. In addition, the refugee situation, we have prioritized those situations because of the urgency. I talked about how when we triage those coming to us in need, we're triaging those who are most imminently at risk of eviction. That is definitely the case for those at the enclave. And those are families who need a very large amount of support, because we can clearly see that many of them don't even have, maybe they have temporary income supports, but even that for some of them is going to be ending soon. So some of them will have no income, and they may have supplemental security income applications pending, but that's a really terrible situation to be in when you have a large family. Some of them have families of 8, 9, and 10. And so that has, in some ways, taken priority. And so what I hear is that the caseload has been crushing, just the existing demand from all of our county residents, and then the crisis at the enclave. It really has proven to be overwhelming. But I have to say, our staff at CEF are tremendously committed. I see them, they put their heads down no matter what we're dealing with. They put their heads down and they do the work. So I'm so proud of them, their persistence and perseverance. And as I say, we're going to continue doing the work and do our very best with what we have.
Thank you, Director Hong. I'll yield till the next round. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Sales. Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you. And first off, I would be remiss in not thanking Councilmember Mink for all of her work on the enclave. And while we're not sitting next to each other today, we frequently are sitting next to each other. And she's had to listen to me say so many times how disappointing it is that, if you're granting asylum and people need to come because of harm elsewhere, but with immigration being a federal issue without the support of the federal government on all fronts related to it, and this has been a long-standing problem, it creates horrible situations that to me are not humane for those who are coming here because they need support and because they want a better future. And to find themselves in the current situations in which they are in after already going through significant trauma is just really hard. And for your team and your staff and everyone, all the external advocates who have also been collaborating on this issue as well, that's a lot of other trauma to take in on your own selves as you're doing that work. And so I know that they work tirelessly to try and problem solve and triage, as you said, in the best ways possible. And I want to just give a huge thank you to everyone who has been involved in that effort. And I think my colleagues have covered a bunch of questions, but one of the things that one of your early slides, and we've talked about this at prior discussions on these issues, what is the average amount of arrears for those who are facing eviction right now?
Yeah.
And I don't just mean at the enclave, I mean in general for the universe that you're serving.
Yes. So this is a difficult one, and I alluded to this in previous work sessions. We work in multiple systems, one of which is EICM. It's a centralized database. That's primarily where housing stabilization enters their data. The challenge in answering your question is that the amount of arrears is typically listed in the notes section, which is hard to search and then average out.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that I believe in the previous work session I had shared, we just had a new data manager start. There's actually been a significant amount of development that's happened since then. And I'd like to share that because I can't provide that number to you. I could talk anecdotally. Actually, let me first talk anecdotally that sometimes, and this is the case for the refugees at the enclave as well, we're continuing to see arrearages of 10,000 and 20,000, sometimes even 30,000. I can't tell you what the total average is because of the challenge with our database. However, as far as the way in which we gather data, because of Dr. Bridger's vision to have a centralized way of collecting data across the multiple systems we use in HHS, what has happened since last year is we are transitioning the CEF data team under our planning, analytics, and customer service team. That's under Dr. Richen Nemhart. You've heard from her many times. She also is a visionary in terms of the data that we can use to tell our story and improving our customer service. And so our team is currently transitioning under PACS because she's an expert on all of the systems we use, including HMIS as well. And she understands. She was the one who explained to me the challenge of getting that average amount of arrears and how we have to be able to enter that. Our staff have to enter arrears into a field that is searchable and which can be, easily collected and provided to you. So we do still have constraints and limitations on the way in which our data is entered. As the team is working with under PACS and as part of the PACS team, it's going to take time, I can see, just learning, changing our workflow, ensuring everyone is entering the data in a consistent manner, and that it's the data is quality data. It will take probably a year to 2 years, I estimate, to get to a better place and to be able to say this is what that average is. But we're moving along that process thanks to the leadership of Dr. Bridgers, and I also want to mention the support of Mark Hodge, and also, of course, the visionary leadership of Dr. Nemhart.
And the reason I'm asking is because if you're you're trying to think how do we identify the overall scope of what we're seeing, and then how. So if you're 20,000 in arrears, this has been a problem so how are we getting to closer to the start of the problem so that we're intervening closer to the start of the problem? Because, not just in terms of the workload for you all, but for these families, for these individuals who are affected, the longer it spirals, the worse it is for them individually in dealing with those stressors, right? So you want to be able to target interventions way earlier. And of course, right now you're tasked with putting out fires every day, every single day, right? And I recognize, and especially thank you to our chair for highlighting this, which, it is the elephant in the room, but we're going to be putting out fires for a very long time, right? Yeah. So, that's just sort of things I'm thinking about in terms of how do we help get to the underlying issues so that we're addressing them and faster in a way that's more workable for everyone, hopefully for you all too, and also improves overall outcome, right? And the SHARP program is great. I do think that is where we should be focusing more attention because it has very good outcomes. And I know you said it's 79% retention overall, so that includes our families, which had the 97% retention rate. Do you happen to know what it is for the adult-only retention rate? Because if it's the overall, then that's averaging the families plus the adult. Do you know what the adult-only rate is?
Yes, give Give me a moment. There's too many.
Oh, I know. Yeah, no, she's got all the info.
Yeah. I could also provide it later if
Yeah,
you don't want to take
that's
the time.
fine.
It's in the 70s, so it averages out to be.
So it's probably in the low 70s-ish if it's averaging.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
to 79% overall.
You know, and I'm sure this isn't a surprise to you or to Dr. Bridgers or anyone, because this is how I think, and you all know that. My question is, how do we bridge that gap what are the commonalities or the common factors for whom those who are not successful with retention? Is there a thread? Is there not a thread? Because all of these issues are multi-causal, right? So how do we best sort of wrap our heads around that, where we as policymakers or as funders can use that information to help you in your work? And I know you are very agile in what you do, and you do move and change in order to adapt, but how do we help support that, knowing sort of if there are any things that could be discerned about commonalities in those for whom retention isn't happening, that we can help address, whether it's through SEF or through something else that we do within HHS, with our community partners. That would be great. And then with respect to Progress Place and what I call our highest challenges, period. And I'm going back, I'm serving lunch again next week at Shepherd's Table, but last year when I did it, the day I was there, there had been a sexual assault behind the building. And one of the officers who was in the office upstairs happened to look out the window and see it in progress and went out and intervened. And we did have a disruption during lunch that day, where one of the volunteers, who was a college-aged student, where a client acted out towards the young man, and he was quite taken aback by it and didn't understand what he had done wrong, and he had not, and that was the issue. And so I pulled him aside and I just said, this isn't about you, and it isn't about anything you did. Okay, everything you did just fine. But I feel like the providers there are super challenged, because they're trying to make sure every person is cared for, regardless of how much other behavioral challenges the person may have, that you still need food and you still need to be cared for. But also because they know there's no alternative. And, if someone's behavioral health needs are so acute that, these are going to be chronic issues, there is no place for them right now. And so I wondered if you could speak to, what HHS is doing in the bigger, broader sense, and this might be a Dr. Bridgers question, to help with that. It's a small percentage. It's a small percentage of the people, but they create a high number of needs, like the 100 calls for service to law enforcement. So could you speak to that, Dr. Bridgers, and what might be on the horizon, or what you're lobbying for?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Lukey. Thank you for all the work that you continue to do. We continue to do a lot of work in the mental health space.
Yeah.
And we know we need to increase the support through our mobile crisis outreach team, through our crisis intervention team, through legislation. That's where we need help. And so we continue to work across the agency. All the service agencies have really and progressively moved towards looking at those shared services and challenges across.
Yeah.
And one of the things our chiefs do, who are very engaged in the work that we do at the community level and the individual level, is to see what those needs are. And so that's where we are really focused. There are many things that we need to do, but we know that across the aging span, across the lifespan, we talked about seniors, we talked about adolescents, and we even talked earlier about Generation Alpha, those younger, those 0 to 11-year-olds who may or may not find themselves 20 years from now in a place. And so we need to prepare that generation now. So those are some of the things that we are researching and exploring on the horizon. We talked about the disruptive behavior orders and looking at how we can reimagine that and rethink that. We know that there are many things that happen, from a mental health crises event to substance use disorder that happens after hours.
Right.
And so
Right.
allowing for our partners and our MCPD partners and security services to have the flexibility in working with the Office of the County Attorney, I as the Director of Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, really explored those partnerships and afforded our partners the flexibility based on my authorization and ability to have proxies for that. And I think that that's where many of the responses are coming from, but it comes down to responding to the community needs. We have many data points, and we need to look at the interoperability of those data points,
Right.
which is what Ms. Hung talked about, and really looking at not only what's happening now, but what we see on the horizon. So those are some
Yeah.
of the things that come to top of mind when I think about some of the forward-thinking vision that we have as an agency.
And in terms of the state and its ability to help in this regard, and I know, everybody's working through what will the assisted outpatient treatment model look like? How do we create each model in each county? How is this going to work? And I know we're still in the early phases of all of that. But what do you think the state would need to do in order to better facilitate, again, all these different gaps that exist that local jurisdictions are dealing with, that would give the tools to us to be able to better manage this and get people the help they need?
Sure. Again, thank you, Councilmember Lukey. I know Ms. Hung wants to weigh in, but one of the things that I can say that we've done across the agency is that we have strengthened our collaboration and partnership with the state, with the state secretaries. They've been in the county. We've had conversations. We've not only talked about those particular service areas, but we brought those other chiefs into the conversation so that they can see it's multidimensional. That it's just not the services that prevent homelessness. It's
Correct.
our behavioral health and crisis services. It's our public health. It's our aging and disability. And so we continue to have conversations with them. So I think that the state is aware. But again, it comes down to the funding and the policy that's supported by the work that we do. And we continue to push for those initiatives and the support from the council in those areas. And so that's what we're doing now. That has happened. It has increased over the past 2 years since I've been the director, and it may have not been something that happened in the past due to COVID that really got in the way, but that's the support that we need. Lastly, we're also not only pushing at the state level, but also those federal connections that we have, because some of the contracts, some of the grants, some of the support mechanisms that we have at the local level are indirected, connected to the federal fund and the federal funding sources. We've seen ARPA, we've seen
Right.
FEMA, and some of those resources have gone away. So what do we do outside of those funding streams to address the complexities at the local level? So those are some of the things that we're doing there. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. As far as work with the state, and first let me acknowledge our new Chief of Behavioral Health, Monica Martin. She's been a wonderful collaborator even before she was Chief.
Yes.
And we've had numerous conversations about the challenges we're seeing down county that are very clear at Progress Place and across the street. Council Vice President, we've talked about so many of those situations, and your staff have attended countless meetings about them. And so Chief Martin has joined many of those meetings, and so that she can understand what is happening and what the need is. And I first want to acknowledge, so her goal has been to look for ways that behavioral health can support what Ceph is doing. So that's deploying more peers. And let me take a moment, I veer in many directions.
That's okay.
Let me take a moment to acknowledge all of you, and particularly Council Vice President Stewart, for advocating and pushing for the 3 peers that are now based at Progress Place. They've staffed up to 2. They have one more vacancy to fill. But even with 2, they have already sent nearly 50 individuals to treatment. That is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's awesome.
that success makes me so happy, because it's clearly an intervention that we saw that would be effective. Now it's in place as a result of all the support provided and all the advocacy, and it's changing lives. And that's exactly what we need to do. And I can say that Chief Martin, she's come right alongside me. She also is working to deploy more peers in street outreach, and she has her prevention and harm reduction manager also seeking to work alongside the outreach partners in providing for the needs there, including Narcan and fentanyl test strips. You've heard that there have been some fatal overdoses in Silver Spring, one directly across the street from Progress Place. That was a client they had gotten to know so well. So heartbreaking, and increases our resolve to do more and to work more collaboratively with behavioral health. In addition to that, at the state level, many of you are aware Delegate Charkoudian is very also aware and involved of what we're seeing down county and downtown Silver Spring as far as the acuity of behavioral health needs. So she helped to start a conversation with our state officials, with the Behavioral Health Association, and so we've had multiple meetings with Deputy Secretary Alyssa Lord to talk about how do we meet the need for those who are in this gap where they're not consenting to services, and yet they need them so desperately. So they are welcoming a proposal for a potential behavioral health respite program, one that is very low barrier, does not require consent as far as receiving behavioral health services, because many we serve don't have insight that that's what is needed.
Correct.
Yet we know that the engagement is very effective when you're not saying, do you consent to working with a psychiatrist?
Right.
If we're saying we want to get to know you, we want to build rapport, and why don't you come inside where it's safe, into this environment that is welcoming, where we're not setting up criteria where they're going to be saying no. So that's a vision that Chief Martin is supportive of, and that we're looking to develop a proposal to present to the state. And they have expressed openness to looking at it and doing something different in Montgomery County to meet that need for that specific population.
Yes, and I've spoken with them as well, because this is an issue very near and dear to me, and has been for most of my governmental service career. And also, ensuring that the judiciary is kept apprised. I think often the judiciary is this branch of government that's kind of out here that people don't often think about. And yet in that model, and whether it's AOT or the bigger, broader sequential intercept model analytical tool and framework, you can't get there unless you're also including the judiciary in there. And there are gaps, right? There are existing gaps in the tools that they have too available, in terms of assisting with diversion, in terms of assisting with how to maybe have that moment where the light bulb goes off, that they do come inside and then they do agree to actual treatment. And so, my ask is that we continue that, and also not just cross-agency and cross-departmental collaboration and collaboration between the state and the local government, but cross-branch of government too. And don't forget our partners over in the judiciary. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink, followed by Council Vice President Stewart.
Thank you. First, I really want to express my appreciation and admiration for the CEF team and HHS on their work within this space. It's just absolutely doing so much with truly not enough at a really critical time. And just everyone in the space I know is just working incredibly diligently. And Rebecca Sosa, I can't give enough props to. Truly amazing, and the whole team. I'm just so deeply grateful, and the community members are grateful. They know your names. They know your names, and they're like, they're amazing. The teams. So thank you. And that's folks who are going through incredibly difficult times. So it will be easy to be angry with government and frustrated, but they see the work that you all are doing. So thank you so much. And every success story that you have coming out of this is so deeply meaningful. And I just want to make sure that there's so many challenges and people who I know that you want to be doing more for, but there are a lot of people that you and your teams are really helping, and every single one of those means so very much. So thank you all so much. Shifting to talk budget, especially in the wake of the election. I'll just say it, like in the wake of the election results, the unknowns that introduces and some of the probably knowns that it introduces, we have to be fiscally prudent. There's a lot of question marks. We have to make smart investments. And so I really appreciate that you're here today explaining how to do that when it comes to CEF services. So you've given us some of the numbers that we can really look at to see how increasing SHARP funds is going to help us prevent the steadily increases to overflow sheltering costs that nobody wants to see for a range of reasons, but also just from a fiscal sense. We can't afford to be investing in that way. It doesn't make sense. So I'm so glad that you have come before us with an explanation of how we can help to slow and hopefully stop that, and then eventually be decreasing that and shifting where we're having our funds. When we look at investing in emergency rental assistance in the RAP program, there may be concerns amongst people who are not on the ground, like your team, that subsidizing rent through a program like that is really just putting off the inevitable, throwing money at something that then is going to just happen down the line, and that if we're to put more funding into that program, we'll just find ourselves back in the same place with those clients, but with less money for the county, by the end of the fiscal year. Could you talk a little bit about if that's not the case, why that's not the case, the kind of work that goes on the inside to make sure that folks are emerging from that in a way, better off than when they started, and why an investment like that makes sense from a fiscal perspective?
Yes, and I wonder if first I could pass the floor to Ms. Anderson, because she was sharing some insights about our expenditures with motels connected to increased funding for SHARP, which is a form of rental assistance extended over 12 months. And then I would invite Ms. Sosa to join us to also add to the question about the emergency rental assistance, as she led the charge on distributing over $100 million in emergency rental assistance and has the experience to share related to that. And then Ms. Anderson can start.
Great.
Hello again. I've been listening to some of the questions surrounding the funding for SHARP and the additional funding that we're requesting for motels. And a couple of things come to mind. I am very closely involved with that process and that data. So one of the things that we haven't highlighted that's really important for this conversation is that when we're looking at those numbers that are steadily increasing, it's cumulative, right? Over the last 3 months, we've had 20 plus new households entering our system each month, which brings us to 140 as of October 31st. Part of that issue, which we didn't show in our slides, is that while we're having the steady increase in the front door, we are also very limited on those exiting, right? So without the resources that we've had in the past for SHARP, for rapid rehousing for families, those families are staying within our system longer, which creates those numbers that we are seeing steadily increasing. Someone asked, I believe it was Council Member Sales, about the numbers and maybe the discrepancy over how successful it is for families. It's a little bit less successful for individuals, and what the distinction is. On the family side of our homeless system, as I mentioned before, by and large, one of the biggest challenges is just low income and the inability to meet the demands of providing for families of 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10. So the intervention that is most commonly called for, based on our assessments on the family side, is rapid rehousing, is SHARP, which is a short-term subsidy, just enough to get families back on their feet. So when those families get that intervention, 98% of the time, by and large, after that year, they're successful. They've taken that year, used our resources, been able to use resources to get increased income. Maybe the second spouse is able to gain income. They've been able to access other forms that we've connected them with, whether it's Social Security benefits, child care subsidy, all the things that can shore up their household. So it is such an important intervention that has been so successful for families. And as we're talking about all the budgetary constraints that we have and the fact that we cannot have families with children ever, street homeless, knock wood, it's a very rare occurrence in this county. I do think that putting some funds towards that SHARP program again will also allow families to exit our shelter rooms, our motels, and lease up into permanent housing. Right away, that's creating movement in the system. The numbers are so high because, on the one hand, we're seeing more increase coming in, but we're also seeing a drop-off of those able to exit without the ability of our department to provide them with that little bit of shoring up until they're able to be independent again. So I think in that way, it would really, more than likely, lead to a decrease in our motel spending, and it's a better investment overall. Way better to put that money into housing a family in their own home than temporarily sheltering in a motel space. So I just wanted to share that comment.
And I just want to underscore a part of the answer that you provided relevant to your question, which is that Ms. Anderson referenced our permanent supportive housing programs, which have a 98% retention rate, which is really phenomenal. And we believe it's so effective because it's rental assistance or housing. Sometimes it's a site-based housing, like at Cordell, Seneca Heights, Progress Place, and the supportive services that that household needs. And we know that that works, and that long-term, if there are barriers, that can be what helps a family to be successful, or a household. Not all families need, especially families tend to be less vulnerable, families that we're seeing, and they may not need it permanently, but I think that's the key to the answer, and I'm going to pass it to Ms. Sosa to add to that, based on her experience with the emergency rental assistance program, which goes to the question, the first part of the question you asked.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. So with what we've been seeing over the last several years, I think one of the things that we had really hoped to do more of was that eviction prevention case management. That is really needed to get more at the root of what we're seeing in our community, so that people have that extra support, more skills teaching, getting people connected to resources, financial empowerment, workforce development, things like that. The extra subsidies that we can provide to help people meet that small gap that they have, whether it's with SHARP or whether it's with the rental, excuse me, the subsidy with the rental assistance program, that's really critical for many people as well. There are many people struggling who just have a small gap between their income and what they need in order to pay the rent. That's really critical for our team. It's a challenge not being able to refer people over to the rental assistance program at this point. There are many people who we would like to refer, who we think could be successful in maintaining their stability if they had that support, but it's just not there at the moment for us.
Thank you. And on the ground, I'll just say it's heartbreaking to watch it as well. It really is. And the number of people, as we saw, the numbers of the writs and the numbers of the evictions, and I'm so grateful to the sheriff's office for their collaboration with your team as well to allow for triaging as best as possible. But the dearth of resources in this space for you all with trying to manage that, and seeing that play out on the ground, and it just has to be addressed. It just does not make sense morally or fiscally. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation. When people end up, when families, individuals end up in motels and in shelter beds, when we could have invested a little bit more at that moment, but a little bit less than it's going to be over time now for those folks, to prevent them from losing their housing, there are costs associated besides just the expense of those shelter beds and of those motel rooms. Mental health, other related health care, public safety, the kids who are trying to attend school and have some kind of continuity there. And so those expenses, again, not just from a moral standpoint, but even from a fiscal standpoint, add up in other ways for the county as well. Could you talk just a little bit about that? Not necessarily to the numbers, but on the impact of folks who are losing their homes and struggling with instability.
Yeah, as you know, because you've seen it play out so many times, and it's painful. It's so painful to just know that there's nothing we can do. I mean, when you look at the numbers that I showed on the evictions, 800 to 900 families evicted every year. I mean, in some ways, when you look at the total percentage that are scheduled, yes, that's a small percentage, 11% for this fiscal year. But the impact on those families is devastating and so costly for their children emotionally. That trauma will live on in their lives forever, and we need to work harder to prevent it for all of those families. We the judiciary system they have a role to play, but there is more we can do, as you know. And I have to say, I am really, really thankful for Sheriff Lee's support. He's open to everything we propose. It's the constraints of his staff, and we see that play out as well. I mean, they're working with a system that is paper-based. They have just a handful of deputy sheriffs who have to do all of the work related to all of the court documents, ensuring that they're following their procedures. And then we're adding on the request. We're saying, please share your data with us. Please collaborate us. Please add our resources into your court mailings. And they simply don't have the staff to do it. They have absolutely the desire and willingness to partner with us and have in what ways they can. But I think that is where we can make great change in in responding proactively beyond what we're doing now. We know that in Philadelphia there is there's now a policy where landlords must first attempt mediation before they make a court filing for an eviction. I would love to have something like that in Montgomery County. Have spoken to DHCA about it, very supportive. That also would require an investment because, as you've seen in the data, 40,000 people having court filings means potentially 40,000 households needing mediation. But that's where we need to move our work, right? Before a family is at risk for eviction, what can be done in a mediation? We know that landlords are often open to payment plans. They're often open to reducing arrearages if a family can pay some of it, maybe a significant percent, but not all, so that they can maintain. So there is much more we can do, but again, it is an investment. But that is something that we would see immense returns on, not just budgetarily, but just in the health of our community, the health of families overall. That pays off in so many ways. I mean, in fewer people who are traumatized and then bear those scars for their entire life, which we see that the fallout is in our behavioral health system. And so those needs are there, and that trauma is definitely impactful. It plays out quietly sometimes in people's lives. We don't see it until a person can't manage anymore and they're experiencing homelessness. So it's just something that we have to commit to doing as a community. We're not there yet. I mean, the commitment is there. The resources aren't yet there, but I think that's something we can strategically tackle together because the conversations are happening, and I'm very excited about the prospect of getting to a point where you don't have to see that happening every day. When the sheriff is going out to a property, And you and I have communicated about this, but sometimes I just sit there silently. I can't even respond because we can't do anything at that point. It's too late.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to yield, but I'll just note that, we just had an eviction day where the sheriff was on site at the Enclave, and there was a family who, as you know, who did not end up being evicted that day, but they were facing potential eviction that day. It was a family with children, with disabled children, and the trauma of that looming potential eviction and the sheriffs being there. And thank you so much again to the sheriffs for their consideration of how to handle the day. But even despite not being evicted, one of their children had a stress-induced seizure and had to go to the hospital in an ambulance that day. And had we had some of the funds in those places, in the programs that you're talking about, that would not have happened. And so I absolutely see this as an imperative. We can absolutely do better, and it makes fiscal sense to do so, as well as for a slew of other reasons. The traumas are happening right now. We have an incredible caseload of people who are facing imminent eviction because we don't have some of these programs in place, and they're about to end up in our overflow shelter systems. So I think we need to do something very quickly, and it would be great to get a sense from the executive branch of what the layout of a plan that makes fiscal sense but also makes logistical sense looks like, in terms of the balance of what funding should be across these programs to get us through the fiscal year. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Council Vice President Stewart.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the chair. Glad to visit Health and Human Services today. Thank you to Dr. Bridges, Chief Hong, and everyone who's here, not just for today in this excellent report, but for all of your work and your partnership. There's a great deal of work to be done, and all of you approach it with such compassion and professionalism every day, even under very hard circumstances. And so we're very lucky in the county to have you. I also do want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Mink, for all her work at the Enclave. It has just, that situation we don't need to continue, but it has really been so difficult, and how you've approached it, working with not only like our state but our federal delegation on this, and continue to do that work. I have a couple of questions and one request. One, Dr. Bridges, I know you talked about, and Ms. Hong, working with our state partners, secretaries at in the Moore administration, and one of the things I believe, but I don't want to be remiss in just mentioning it and being redundant, is Secretary Day, our housing secretary. When he was here to visit, we did talk a good deal about our unhoused population and the challenges that we're facing, and just wanting to make sure that as we are going to face challenges at the federal level moving forward, as this year goes on, looking at our state partners and making sure they also know our success stories here. And I think Secretary Day will be a great partner in all of that. I had a question about the permanent supportive housing that we've talked about, how important it is. Do any of you know the last time that the county was involved in a project to build permanent supportive housing?
Push the button again,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
I do believe that the residences at Progress Place is the last site-based permanent supportive housing the county constructed. And I should share, I have a couple updates that I'm remiss in sharing throughout the course of the questions. So first is that HUD has introduced a continuum of care builds notice of funding opportunity this year. And Montgomery County is applying for that because it is explicitly for building new permanent supportive housing. It's $7.5 million that the county is eligible to apply for. We have been working with OMB, DGS, and DHCA on strategizing for our application. So that could potentially, if we are awarded $7.5 million, we could combine that with $7 million we were already awarded for home in HUD home funds. $7 million is not enough to build new housing. but 14.5 million, I'm told, is enough, and that we could build 30 additional units of permanent supportive housing. And HUD would also allow for 20% of the COC Builds Award, which amounts to 1.5 million, to be ongoing operating expenses that could be renewed for each funding cycle. That is huge, because that means we wouldn't have to rely as much on local funds to kick in the supportive services, which is what is needed, which has been the case for the Interfaith Works residences, Seneca Heights, and Cordell Place. Those are our 3 single-site permanent supportive housing programs. It's the county that pays for the supportive services. Right. So this is a huge opportunity that we're very excited to apply for, and the application is due later this month, and we would hear whether we're awarded the grant later in the spring. But definitely building more permanent supportive housing is a key solution to the homeless, the population we see that is vulnerable, which we've talked a lot about today. In addition, I just had a meeting with Enterprise Development about a project they have, and want to acknowledge you for your leadership, Council Vice President Stewart. With the faith zoning text amendment, I understand they are planning to develop the Silver Spring United Methodist property and have affordable housing there. And they reached out to us to talk about partnering on placements for permanent supportive housing where there's rental assistance and supportive services. And we talked about 35 potential additional slots there. We would need some funding for the supportive services, but perhaps it could be a partnership with CEF where we placed, so our housing initiative program is rental assistance and our partners provide supportive services. I was thinking we could partner with Enterprise to secure the housing in that development, and we would provide, of course, the services and the referrals. So that's another potential collaboration. But definitely more permanent supportive housing is something we are always seeking.
Great, thank you so much, and hopefully you can get that HUD application in, and maybe HUD can do some magic and turn it around as quickly as possible. Could I add one more update? I'm so sorry, because I'm just, as I've been listening, I'm realizing I missed something else, which is our collaboration with the State Department of Housing and Community Development. Secretary Day was immensely supportive in our work with the refugees. So, and this is a question, Councilmember Sales, you asked and I neglected to answer. So we, the county executive had sent a letter to both Secretary Day and Secretary Lopez seeking assistance on the situation at the enclave. And within 24 hours of receiving that letter, Secretary Day's team provided $200,000 for us to help with arrearages at the enclave, which we will apply to the households that can remain there, the refugee households, though there are many that need to relocate because their income isn't sufficient to afford the ongoing rent. And then in addition to that, this was really, really a huge update I should have provided at the beginning, that his team also identified $1.28 million in emergency rental assistance that hadn't been spent by other jurisdictions across the state. So this is COVID era dollars that are remaining that they are now giving to Montgomery County so that we can continue to provide eviction prevention, because I did mention earlier our funds will run out in the spring. So that will extend us for another potentially 2 months. If we run out in March, that'll get us through April and May. So that was hugely appreciated by us during this difficult time. So I did want to share that, and his team has been very, very supportive of our work. Great, thank you so much. And then on, I do want to acknowledge on at Progress Place and the vicinity and the work that you all have been doing with the partners there, our police department. We are so lucky to have Officer Nikki Hawkins in downtown Silver Spring. I don't know what we would do without her, and our Safe and Clean team, our red shirts. Carson Henry, and just it is a team effort there and in that community, and I just want to thank everyone. And I know I know the DBOs are difficult. I know that, and I'm so sorry about the impact it has on the staff and the community, and because it is the community also. These are people, and if they get a DBO, we know they don't receive services, but they're still in our community, and that means they are interacting sometimes with police officers, sometimes with community members, or they're on their own. And so I just want to say thank you so much, because I know how hard these decisions are for everyone. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And then my last thing is my ask. And this might go to Ms. Clemens Johnson, and thank you for all your work. But I'm thinking very carefully about how we enter our budget this year, and all that we were looking at before we had the news of the election earlier this week, and then now with this news. And Seth does so much great work, and we've talked about it today, and the packets are terrific. This is my request, and I think we had this last year in the budget packet, but is to get a table of all the different programs that Seth is running, a chart that looks at them with short descriptions, the funding source, what has been budgeted, what are the actuals, and so that we can see that over the last couple of years, and particularly the funding source if you're getting things from federal grants or state or other things. I think having a chart like that, a table, for those of us who do not have the pleasure of serving on HHS and get to see you more often, I think will be really helpful to us and our colleagues as we are thinking about the needs we have, over the next couple of months, and then specifically when we're looking at the budget. So that's my request. And I just again want to say thank you for everything. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you. I think, or does anybody else have any other questions? Councilmember Sales, yeah, we've got a couple more minutes.
All right, thank you. Just a few more questions. I noticed on Circle 7, there was a chart about the significant increase in substance use and co-occurring disorders among adult-only households, as well as the rise in individuals who were formerly institutionalized. Are there any efforts to work with our behavioral services to address these issues that are probably contributing to the uptick in the need for more security at some of our places? So don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question and pointing that out. So to be best equipped to serve so Seth, we are set up to serve the housing crisis and to provide supportive services. And Chief Martin and I both know we have to partner closely to serve the behavioral health need as well. We attempt to do that. We attempt to meet the need within our SEF programs and the many amazing community partners we have. And I want to acknowledge Every Mind for being here. They head up our outreach efforts as well as our diversion efforts, and they also do permanent supportive housing and much more beyond what they do with SEF. So, and they also operate our homeless information line. So I want to acknowledge them. And we know that we have to continue to partner closely. So one of the solutions that has been developing as far as responding to behavioral health need is oftentimes, let me first start by saying we operate using harm reduction approaches because we know that people have experienced trauma, and sometimes that results in behavioral health issues, including substance use disorders. So sometimes people will come to our programs under the influence, and it is very helpful to have an intervention for them. If they are struggling to be in a congregate setting, it's very, very helpful for them to be able to go to a setting that is less stressful, where where they have to navigate sleeping with, 50 to 200 people. And so our stabilization room has been a resource that that has been helpful. And one of the barriers that we faced is, how do we transport someone when they're under the influence to the stabilization room? And I know that that is something that we as HHS are working on in finding safe transportation methods. I have to say we rely a lot on Lyft. That's not really fair to the Lyft drivers, right? If someone is in crisis, a Lyft driver should not be the one transporting them. So HHS has made that something that we are working on in securing transportation, and I know that we're also working with emergency dispatch when the incident or the situation rises to the level of needing emergency transportation. But we also know that our emergency services are also very heavily taxed and stretched thin. So that's something that HHS is working on. I don't know, Dr. Bridgers, if you wanted to share more about that effort.
Thank you, Ms. Hung. I saw you keep looking at me, so I was waiting for your call. Yes, we are working on strategies. We've advised and had conversations with the county executive, but also looking at our agency partners, like the Department of Transportation. Some of the vehicles that aren't being used now that are friendly, are transport friendly. We don't need unmarked cars. We don't need marked vehicles that may be threatening. And so we are deeply assessing and looking at those culturally appropriate vehicles that are friendly, that can transport those individuals who are in need, whether or not they're transient, homeless, displaced in the community, or who may be in crisis. So as Ms. Hung said, it's an all agency effort, and it's an all county effort to look at those appropriate systems and mechanisms in place that we can get folks. We can get folks into services, wraparound services, health counseling, somatic care. So all of these things are in place now, and they are in progress. But since Ms. Hung asked me to share some of those strategies with you, I wanted you to know some of the things that are really working behind the scenes, but we hope will come forward shortly. And, we have the mobile van that should be online. So there are multiple approaches that we are attempting to help those who may be in need.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. And then I wanted to respond to the question about those who are formerly institutionalized. And one of the things that I have been working on is increasing the collaboration with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. It's definitely something that is much needed. We have returning citizens coming back into the community who don't have housing plans for those who don't have housing. And used to be that they would refer them to Progress Place, and Progress Place has many services, but it is so stressful to be facing returning to the community and not have a plan in place, except, okay, I'm going to show up at Progress Place, which we are proud of the work of Progress Place, but we want there to be more planning. So one of the things that we started to talk about is what are additional ways we can collaborate. So things like giving access to our homeless management information system so that they can see where folks have been served before. And in addition to that, providing access to our diversion resources while folks are planning their return to the community, because then potentially they could use those resources, which is up to $300 a month, to connect with family or friends who would take them in. That is a far better plan for reentry than not knowing, which is the worst plan, right? Yeah. It's not a plan at all. In addition to that, I want to acknowledge Everymind. They have started to do outreach in the jail in Clarksburg and started to build the rapport with folks there so that they're aware of Everymind services and then get them started on planning for their return. It's not that the staff at DOC are not planning. It's just, as we know, sometimes the date when they are released is not known by people. It happens, at the court and can be like the same day. So though the staff are working diligently at DOCR, sometimes there isn't enough warning to know what that date will be. In addition to all of this, we are looking to increase the number of beds. I mean, actually, it's not an increase because we haven't had beds dedicated for returning citizens previously. So in our upcoming RFPs for the Neville Street Emergency Shelter, we have put in the RFP that there would be designated beds for returning citizens so that when they're returning without knowing the date, that there are beds set aside for them to do that. And once they get there, they would be connected to case management. And there are also diversion services at the shelters as well. So they can attempt diversion, and if that's not successful, it would be an assignment to case management.
Thank you. This is why I introduced legislation to strengthen the ban the box legislation. And I'm not sure if you're working with the Office of Human Rights to report landlords who violate this law, and if there are any measures to hold landlords accountable.
Yes. We do work with the Office of Human Rights on reporting when there's suspected discrimination from landlords, which we actually see sadly quite regularly. And I know you all have heard about those reports and hear from your constituents. It is a problem that continues to go a bit unchecked in Montgomery County. So one of the things that I had shared in one of the spring budget sessions is that we started to work with the Equal Rights Center that does fair housing testing. So we know our case managers and housing locators have experienced really countless times when landlords will say, we will not accept that program, we will not accept that subsidy, that source of income, which of course is not lawful. So we worked with the Equal Rights Center, and they conducted testing over the summer and found that of the 18 landlords they conducted, 11 of them stated that they would not accept the resources that we have to house folks. So very concerning. And when we looked at what enforcement could be done in Montgomery County, we have found that the Montgomery County source of income laws are not clear when it comes to short-term subsidies. So that is SHARP, that is rapid rehousing. Landlords can they can specify that is not enough. It's not enough long-term enough. I'm trying to articulate it, but because it's not permanent income, that they can actually say, or it's not clear in the county law whether they have to accept it. So we have started to talk, DHCA, Director Bruton, myself, and the county attorney have started to talk about possibly a legislative amendment to strengthen the county's fair housing laws. In addition to that, we do intend to share the report the findings from the Equal Rights Center to the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights as well, just so that we're covered, because as I said, it happens. I mean, landlords regularly tell our workers, we're not going to take that. We're not going to take SHARP. We're not going to take rapid rehousing, when those are the solutions that work best for families, as Ms. Anderson shared. And so when we see families who are languishing in motels and then landlords are saying they won't accept the interventions that work best for families, it creates the bottleneck we're seeing. So I can't emphasize enough how important that work is to move forward. And if we were to introduce legislative change, I would request your support just in strengthening our fair housing laws. And we would certainly do our due diligence in determining what the impacts would be on the housing providers.
Thank you, Chief Hong. And one last question. Given the racial and income disparities regarding our homeless population, it's disproportionately high for people of color in the latest point in time count. Are there any targeted strategies or actions underway to address this?
Yes. So what is really important for us to do is to, in addition to noting and clearly seeing the major disparity amongst people of color who we're serving, is to drill down on our data and to evaluate why the disparities are happening. I mean,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Don't apologize.
I'm just going to clarify because I've been coughing throughout the session. It was a bout of pneumonia, which I've taken multiple courses of antibiotics. I'm not contagious, but the cough is lingering. I just felt like I should explain because I'm coughing throughout the hearing chambers. So my apologies for that. But yes, so we do know we need to drill down on our data more carefully to look at where we can identify the causes of disparities. Clearly, we have a history of structural racism in our country. That is work that, all of the systems have to undertake, not just HHS. I mean, HHS, I'm very proud that we have leadership that understands this issue and this disparity, and we are focused on it. Yeah. In addition to looking at our data more carefully, to understand the causes of the disparities better, in addition to the institutional and structural racism, we need to center our work on people with lived experience. And that is something I'm very proud that our team has done. I want to acknowledge Rosina Adhanom. She has really lifted up our People's Committee and is so committed, in addition to our whole team, in lifting up the voices of people with lived experience. Because they will guide our work. They are the ones who can tell the story, disproportionately impacting people of color, but also there are other intersectionalities. There is disability, there is the LGBTQ population, older adults, those with behavioral health conditions. Homelessness is the fallout of the intersectionality of all of those populations, and so it's only those with lived experience who can speak to the truth of what they have been through and how we can resolve or attempt to resolve the disparities we see. So that work continues to be of great importance, and we because of the work that Ms. Adhanom has done, as well as our deputy chief, she is focusing in, I hope you don't mind me calling you out, on racial equity, on her doctoral dissertation in social work, and I'm so proud of her focus every day on the need for greater racial equity, and that work with the People's Committee and people with lived experience. I believe Montgomery County is a model because it is such an important way such an important way to address racial disparities and lifting up those voices. So thank you for that question, and really am looking forward to the continual progress we make in that area.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for the work that you are doing, and as we move forward into a new fiscal year, we know it's going to become even more challenging with limited resources. So please do not hesitate to contact our offices and let us know how we can partner and support you in the efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lukey has a follow-up, followed by Councilmember Mink, and let's try to wrap up in 10 minutes because we got an afternoon session.
I'll be fast. And I want to thank Councilmember or Vice President Stewart for asking the question about the permanent supportive housing units, and thank you for being able to provide a number right away. That is very important. We need housing of all kinds of types here in the county to be expanded because we can't solve our supply-demand challenge without tackling it from multiple directions, but particularly for our most vulnerable, the permanent supportive housing is the way to go to reduce the utilization of moteling and the sheltering. And so I appreciate that. You mentioned the need to strengthen the fair housing laws. Do you think that is most needed locally or at the state level in order to maximize the benefit? And I ask that because, again, we have a lot of cross-jurisdictional challenges. And so if something goes in place in one place, is there a problem in another jurisdiction where we then have people who are coming here who weren't originally from Montgomery County, as noted in the packet, right? Is a statewide solution something that will get us collectively in a better place in that regard?
Yeah, so what we know is that the county's law needs strengthened, right? And it's not clear enough. We haven't yet, we did have a preliminary meeting with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, and plan to have a second meeting so that they can share with us their evidentiary standards in receiving reports like we're going to provide from the Equal Rights Center. So we have to stay tuned on that. There's also a case going to the Supreme Court related to fair housing enforcement. So the county attorney, we would like to see the outcome of that, but that probably won't happen for a year or so. So we are going to continue our conversations with the Maryland Commission on their evidentiary standards. I think the biggest thing the state could do at this point is to pass just cause eviction, because that is another form of discrimination we see where those that we serve, disproportionately people of color, often don't get their leases renewed after we've housed them. And then they land right back in the homeless system, which is, I've spoken to the trauma of being evicted, but the re-traumatization, you can imagine how horrifying that would be for a family to face returning to homelessness after overcoming it. So that is an important area of focus. I know there have been struggles in passing that. I know that all of you and our county executive have testified on behalf of just cause eviction, but we have to continue the fight until it's passed, because discrimination happens in many forms, and it's often hidden, and we have to, we are aware because we see it play out in the lives of those we serve, but we have to continue to advocate for that. So I would say that's the other solution that is absolutely necessary for the state to pass.
And the fair housing case that you mentioned, that's a United States Supreme Court case that's proceeding, or a Maryland Supreme Court case?
I need to send that to you. That was one that the Office of the County Attorney pointed out that we need to follow very closely. So I will send you the information about that, as well as the retention rates for individuals in SHARP.
Thank you. And the chart that Councilmember Sales was referring to on page 7, and she asked you some questions about formally institutionalized individuals. When I'm looking at the chart, the percentages of the total add up to more than 100%, and I'm assuming that's because, again, it's self-reported and people may have reported more than one of the categories. Is that accurate?
So that's not data I shared. I don't believe that's data that I shared, but I can get back to you on that. I can review it and get back to you on that.
Okay. And I also, the assumption in the questioning seemed to be that formally institutionalized applied to those who had been in corrections, and that phrase was not being used to mean those who had previously had extended inpatient psychiatric hospitalization stays and or involuntary commitment. And so if you could get some clarification on that, that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. I just didn't want to let the moment go by either without also really giving a shout out to the folks at the East County Regional Services Center who are doing this work, of which there are many, but I'll specifically highlight Danielle Alvarado Davis, who has been absolutely incredible with the case management. Amanullah Jawad, amazing, really, really indispensable. So I really thank and appreciate them. Their work has been so critical and necessary. And it's clear that kind of the fiscal outlook of this shifting again is being discussed within the executive branch, and so I look forward to hearing more about what would make the most sense for us. But we hopefully will get that very soon, so that we can really put a stop to these skyrocketing costs of the overflow sheltering. Thanks.
Thank you. And I also wanted to mention that as challenging as the situation with the refugees at the enclave is, it's really incredible to live in a county like Montgomery County where so many people are rushing in to help, including yourself, Councilmember Mink. I mean, the countless number of texts and calls we've had, as well as the East County Regional Services Center, Danielle Alvarado, and Dr. Earl Stoddard has been very involved, the Sheriff's Office, all the community-based partners I mentioned. It's just been an immense collaboration, and so thankful that we live in a community where people care so very much, and all are rushing in to help. So just wanted to acknowledge that and the hopefulness that lies there. I know that we're facing an uncertain future, but there is so much hope in Montgomery County, and wanted to express that and my
Thank you so
gratitude
much,
for
yeah.
that.
MCC, the Muslim Community Center, ISWA, truly indispensable. Thank you.
Well, that was an uplifting way to end a very sobering conversation with obviously many challenges ahead, but we will be on the lookout. I know the executive branch is reviewing all sorts of different policies and procedures, and sadly, there is a roadmap and blueprint that has, the Project 2025. We kind of know what's coming, so we have to be as best prepared for it as we can. But thank you all very much. This was a very fruitful conversation. Lots of work to do. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.
Continues. But as Dr. Stoddard said, we thought it was very important to take a pause today to update people on the efforts that we were putting in place here in downtown Silver Spring to make sure you know that we are hearing the businesses, we are hearing the residents, and we are committed to this area. So I know we're going to go more in depth in a moment, but I want to highlight a few things that we are doing here. Yesterday on the County Council, we passed a bill that will create parity across the board for our late night establishments. So if you are an establishment that serves alcohol or serves hookah, you will be closing at 2 a.m. during the week or